So this is lab number 5, creating a generic data source. In this lab, we are going to configure a data source within WebLogic using the admin's console. And we're going to connect that data source to the Derby database that comes with WebLogic. So the first thing we have to do is actually start the Derby database server and actually create a database instance that we can connect to. So let's go ahead and open up a terminal window. So the Derby database is located under Derby Home. Now, Derby Home is defined in the lab. You'll see that it's where we install the Oracle WebLogic. So under Lab Home or U01 Udemy, Oracle Middleware, Oracle Home, WL Server, and inside that there's a common directory, and inside that is Derby. So you can see in here we have a bin directory, a demo directory, and a lib directory. The lib directory contains all the jar files, specifically the JDBC client jar that we're going to use to configure the data source later on. But for now, I want to go into the bin directory and start the Derby server. Before I can start the Derby server, though, you need to have the Java Home environment variable defined. If you don't have that defined already, then please set it. You can define it in your profile or your bash profile or in Windows as part of your profile, or you can define it here on the command line. So if I do an echo on Java Home, this is where I have my Java Home defined. This is how it looks like if you're on a Mac. And I have this variable defined in my bash profile, so that when I open up a terminal window like this, it's automatically set and I don't need to worry about it. So once you have Java Home defined, so if we do a listing in here, we can see the various startup and shutdown scripts. And I'm not entirely sure what all of these are, but the one that we want to run is the start network server command. So go ahead and run that. And it should start up pretty quick. You'll know that it's running when you see the statement started and ready to accept connections on port 1527. So remember that port number. So go ahead and open up another terminal window. I'm going to open up a tab here. And what we want to do is now we want to create a database instance within Derby. And we do that by launching Derby's interactive JDBC shell. So to do that, let's go back up here and go into the lib directory. And inside the lib directory, there's a jar file called derbyrun.jar. And that contains a bunch of runtime utilities that we're going to need. Let's go ahead and start the interactive shell for Derby. And the syntax for that is java-jar derbyrun.jar. So we're going to run this jar file and we're going to specify ij as the parameter. So we're going to launch the interactive Java shell or JDBC shell. Go ahead and hit enter. And it automatically launches an interactive shell. So you'll get this ij prompt. So in order to create a database within Derby, we can issue a connect statement. So we're going to connect to a database. May seem kind of weird, but we're going to connect to a database that doesn't exist, but we're going to pass in a parameter to create it if it doesn't exist. So the syntax, and this is in the lab, so I'm just going to type it out here. And this is standard JDBC syntax for Derby. So localhost 1527, which is the port that Derby's running on. And then we're going to put in the name of the database instance. And so for the purposes of this lab, I've called it DemoDB. Now, very important, let's pass in the command to create this database if it doesn't exist, and that is create equals true. I don't need to tell you syntax is important. The semicolons are important. The single quotes are important. So make sure that you've typed it as you see it on the screen or in the lab. So go ahead and hit enter. Not much feedback from Derby, but since there's no error message that we've seen come back, we can assume that the database DemoDB was created. So in this lab, we're not actually going to create any tables or schemas within DemoDB. We're actually going to do that as another exercise in a later lab. So for now, it's good enough just to have this database instance created. Go ahead and exit Derby, typing exit semicolon. So great, we've created our demo database. Now, in order for WebLogic to connect to the database, it needs to know about its JDBC driver. So in order to load the JDBC driver, we need to take the driver and place it in the class path so that WebLogic can find it. So an easy way to do this is that every domain has a lib directory, and any jar files that are placed in this lib directory get automatically loaded onto WebLogic's class path. There are many ways to get libraries onto WebLogic's class path, and WebLogic has rules around in different hierarchies for class paths. So there's the JVM class path, there's a WebLogic runtime class path, and then the application has its own class path. And each one of these takes precedent, has a different precedence and priority. So if we place a library within domain lib, the domain's library directory, then everything and anything running on WebLogic will have access to it. If I put a library in an application's webinf lib or appinf lib directory, only that application has access to it. So I want this JDBC driver to be available for the entire WebLogic domain and anything running within it. So in the lib directory, do a listing again in here, and you'll see a derby client.jar. This is the JDBC client.jar file. Let's go ahead and copy this to our domain homes lib directory. So it's U01, Udemy, domains, our demo domain, and lib. So copy this jar file to the demo domains lib directory. Let's go make sure that it's actually in there. There's no reason why it shouldn't be, but I'd like to confirm. So you'll see that the only thing in here is this derby client.jar and our readme.txt, which isn't very important. Now, if your server is already running, if your admin server is already running, or if you have any managed servers already running, in order for those JVM processes to pick up this additional library on their class path, we must restart everything. So I have nothing running right now, but if your admin server is running from a previous lab or you've got a managed server that's running, go ahead and shut those down and restart your admin server. So I'm going to go ahead and start my admin server. So once your admin server is up and running, I want you to take a look at something here. We can actually check and verify that the derby client jar was actually picked up on the class path. So in my terminal window, I can scroll, but if you can't scroll in your window, go ahead and take a look at the server log file or the domain.log file. So I want to scroll up here just before the WebLogic server starts up, and you can see this log entry right here. The following extensions directory contents have been added to the end of the class path, and we can see that the derby client.jar has been loaded. So this is specific to 12C. I don't believe this actually showed up in 11G. In 11G, if we scroll back further, you can see this is the class path as it is set in the setdomain.env.shell script. And in fact, you can see that it is on the class path as well. So setdomain.env may already be specifying the derby client.jar. So what we did may have been unnecessary, but the process for loading any JDBC driver, particularly if it's a third-party driver, is the same. You would place it on WebLogic on your domain's class path, and you can do that by either editing the setdomain.env and updating the class path environment variable to point to the location of that jar file, or you can place it in domain lib. So now that my admin server is up and running, let's go ahead and log into the admin console.